Despite being such small animals, some insects can migrate astonishingly long distances, sometimes traveling thousands of kilometers. There are 5 main criteria that define animal migration. First, migration involves persistent movement of an individual away from its original habitat. This movement must be driven by the efforts of the animal, although assistance from wind or ocean currents may occur. The movement should also be relatively direct, in that the individuals travel towards a single destination with little deviation in direction. During migration, the individual must remain unresponsive to most stimuli, unlike movement associated with foraging behavior, which is stopped for every feeding opportunity. There must also be observable pre- and post-migratory behaviors and physiological changes that result in the reallocation of resources for different biological processes. We will discuss these behaviors in more detail shortly. Based on these criteria, migration excludes other forms of animal movement that result from foraging behavior, phoresy, and human-associated displacement. It is also distinct from simple dispersal between habitats, during which individuals spread across a geographical region. Migration involves the movement of entire populations or large numbers of a single species. There are several interesting aspects to insect migration. For one, the migratory process can take place over multiple generations. As such, populations returning to the site of origin may not be the same individuals that initiated the migration, but rather their descendants. Furthermore, all insect migrations only ever involve winged individuals. Migration is an energetically costly activity. Migrating individuals have to expend energy that could otherwise be invested in important biological processes, like reproduction or immune responses. Migration is also risky business, and many insects die during the process. However, many migratory insects have evolved adaptations to deal with these costs and increase the probability of a successful migration. The suite of pre-migratory behaviors and traits that predispose an organism to long-distance movement is known as the migratory syndrome. Signs that environmental conditions will become unfavorable can trigger hormonal changes, which in turn stimulate pre-migratory responses in the insect population. These responsive traits can be a combination of morphological, biochemical, physiological, and behavioral adaptations that are absent in non-migratory species or forms. They are known to alter the organism's locomotory ability, resource allocation, reproduction, and survival probability. In insects, a common sign of the migratory syndrome is the occurrence of individuals with larger than normal wings. Large wings can improve flight efficiency and make migration over great distances easier. Another migratory syndrome trait is the redirection of resources normally used to fuel everyday metabolic activity to energy for long-distance movement. Migratory individuals often build up fat reserves before migration by feeding extensively and shunting carbohydrates into storage as fat, rather than spending them on other biological processes. Long-distance flight often postpones reproduction, especially in females, in which egg production is put on hold until after the migratory flight. This is referred to as the Oogenesis flight syndrome, in which migration and reproduction are considered alternative physiological traits that trade off energy use and resource allocation. In fact, a large proportion of migratory insects have undeveloped reproductive systems and are not capable of reproduction until after migration. This reproductive diapause can be induced by hormones in preparation for migration. This in turn has the potential side effect of altering the average lifespan of migratory adults. For example, in some species of Lepidoptera, the suppression of juvenile hormones induces a reproductive diapause and increases the lifespan of the adults. Insect migration has 3 distinct phases: initiation, in which flight-ready migrants begin to take off; transmigration, in which flight is sustained for an extended period and the insects travel significant distances; and termination, when migration ends. The initiation of migration, or takeoff, is prompted by environmental conditions like barometric pressure, temperature, and wind conducive to flight. This is in contrast to the factors known to trigger the migratory syndrome we discussed earlier, like photoperiod or day length. The success and duration of sustained migratory flight, also known as the transmigration phase, depends upon meteorological conditions. Flight mechanisms differ for insects that fly close to the ground or high in the atmosphere, and for those that fly during the day or at night. Many diurnal, or daytime, flyers travel relatively close to the ground and so must contend with turbulence caused by inconsistencies in air pressure as heat rises from the ground. Some daytime flyers use these updrafts to reach higher altitudes where they can cruise on more consistent air currents. Daytime flyers can also navigate by detecting polarized light, or light waves that are transmitted along a single plane, to infer the direction of the sun or to locate the horizon. Some insects can detect polarized light in small sections of their compound eyes that have ommatidia adapted for this purpose. The photoreceptors of these ommatidia are specialized for detection of light polarization rather than for detection of color. By determining patterns of polarized light in the sky, insects are able to orient themselves relative to the sun during flight, even when the sun is not visible. On the other hand, nocturnal migrants tend to fly at high altitudes as they benefit from the more stable air currents at night that result from cooler temperatures. This allows them to take advantage of fast-moving, unidirectional air currents. Although these insects cannot use the sun for orientation, they can make corrections to their flight path and tend to select flight altitudes that allow rapid movement in a favorable direction. In addition to the position of the sun and air currents, some migratory individuals navigate using the light from the moon or via magnetic cues. Magnetoreception is done with specialized receptors that detect the magnetic fields of the Earth using metallic particles. The termination of migration is usually determined by factors such as the depletion of fuel reserves, changes in photoperiod and temperature, as well as the location of an appropriate habitat for reproduction. Insect migration may be considered a response to poor habitat quality that results from overcrowding, resource limitation, or deteriorating environmental conditions. By migrating, insect populations are able to exploit better quality resources using a multi-generational bet hedging strategy for better survival rates and offspring success. Throughout the rest of this module, we will discuss what this means for pest management and conservation biology.